And so basically two things happened. So you could say that the transformation was peaceful, but the aftermath was very bloody. Certainly one of the most bloody of all places was in Yugoslavia. Now, I spent more time in Yugoslavia than any other socialist country, and what actually happened there was beyond my ability to imagine. I felt that under communism, and under the kind of communism that they had in Yugoslavia under Tito, and under a very respected, wonderful, warm, humane member of the World Future Studies Federation named Mihailo Markovic, had been one of the so-called Belgrade Six, who had stood up against Tito, and Tito himself had stood up against Russia. And they were famous for what was called socialism with a human face. And they were very warm, humanistic people. But after the collapse of socialist systems, the ethnic fighting that then broke out in that country, Mihailo Markovic became one of the leading ideologues in favor of the barbarism and the slaughter that went on, led by the Serbs against the rest. I couldn't believe it. So something had been repressing it all that time, and when the chance for self-government actually happened, they were unprepared for it, and so all the old animosities, all the old battles came out again, and they engaged in slaughter that in some ways is still going on. The situation in Russia is not really much better. Many people feel in many of the Eastern European countries that they were better off under communism than they are now, because when the old system collapsed, the gangs and mafia type organizations took over. So one of the major problems has been with the collapse of the old political economic system, and the fact that they hadn't been prepared for governing when they had the chance, they reverted back to old ways of doing things that were extremely bloody. So on the one hand, it was an internal failure. The other, and I think it's at least as bad and as bloody in the long run, is that they were helpless against the multinational corporations and against the global economic system that marched in. They had very naive, CNN-inspired beliefs about what capitalism was like and what democracy was like. And they had no understanding of the power and ruthlessness that the economic corporations would immediately move in and fill in and take over. So both internally and externally, they had not prepared themselves for the change. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot as a consequence of these experiences. I had seen this process happen. I had been exhilarated by the possibility of a kind of freedom occurring, but I saw that they suffered from what I now call the futurist curse, which is, may your dreams come true. May your dreams come true. And if you haven't spent a lot of time saying, what's next? What's going to happen after? Then I think you're in serious trouble. And I don't want that to happen here. I personally think there are many scenarios that lead me to believe that Hawaii could achieve a substantial change in its current political economic status. Now let's call that independence. It can take many, many forms. But I think it can happen quickly and peacefully, as it did in the Soviet Union. But I'm here to ask this group to think long and hard about what life might be like here once that happened. and to make sure that you have or will devote resources to being prepared for what you want if and when the opportunity presents itself. So for tonight, I want to explain some things I'm not going to talk about, so I can focus on the 2 or 3 things that I do want to talk about. First of all, I'm not going to talk about the internal governance of Hawaii at all. I'm simply assuming that Hawaii will achieve independence and will be recognized as independent by the United States and the global community. But in fact, there is another story there that I just want to tell, because once the Soviet Union and the other socialist systems collapsed, there was a question about what new form of government they should take. And the American Bar Association's Constitutional Law Committee and a committee concerned with constitution making by the Agency for AID, I forget what it's called, for International Development, immediately went all over the world encouraging those former socialist countries to adopt the American political system. But Fred Riggs, a professor of political science at the University of Hawaii, had discovered after he had retired as a professor about the fundamental unsustainability of the American presidentialist system. It's a long story I won't go into here, but basically the statistics show up until the 1990s that every government in the world that adopted the American presidentialist system ended up with military dictatorship. That it fundamentally gives one man, the president, too much power. And if you only had a choice, and you have more choices, but if you only had a choice between a presidentialist system and a parliamentary system, the parliamentary system is much better. So Fred formed a group of people that I was a member of as well, and we did our best to convince the former socialist countries, don't buy the American system. It'll lead to a dictatorship. And all you have to do is look at all of the countries in Eastern Europe and the former republics of the Soviet Union to see that's what's happening to all of them. And among other things, is a major contributor to the conflict we're having with Putin and Russia at the present time. It just is an unstable government. So I'm not going to talk at all to you guys about what the internal structure of your government is once you achieve independence. But you need to think about that very carefully in terms of whether it is stable and maintains peace and doesn't itself provoke, as the American system does, collapse for a variety of reasons. So, but other than that, I don't want to say anything about it. I'm also assuming that Hawaii will not have a relationship similar to Indian nations. I'm also assuming that Hawaii is not a kind of state within a state, simply for, not because I want to argue that, I just want to talk about a different situation. I think it's entirely possible that the American Union itself will dissolve into 7 or more smaller nations, and that one of the scenarios that makes me optimistic about the possibility of Hawaii becoming independent is a consequence of the dissolution of the American Union itself. I'm certainly not here to talk about whether it should be a monarchy or not, much less who the monarch should be, whether it should be a representative government or not, or some new kind of a government based upon indigenous Hawaiian practices modernized. All of these are important issues, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm not going to discuss whether one should have Hawaiian blood to be a citizen, or whether Hawaiian citizenship can be open to all who pledge their allegiance. Again, these are extremely important issues. But first of all, I don't think it's proper for me to enter into that debate, and secondly, I don't have the knowledge, information to do so. So those aren't issues that I'm going to be talking about.